6 months into Russia's attack on Ukraine, both sides are suffering heavy casualties, yet seem unable to gain the advantage, at least until you look behind the front lines. Ukraine is increasingly striking Russian targets deep in Russian-occupied territory and may have been responsible for huge explosions at an ammunition depot and an airfield in Crimea. Fresh shelling of Europe's biggest nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhia is meanwhile raising alarm. On To the Point, we're asking, as the Ukraine war grinds on, can either side break the stalemate? Hello and welcome to the Point. It's a great pleasure to welcome our guests, beginning with Jessica Berlin, who is a political analyst with the German Marshall Fund. Gustav Gressel is Senior Policy Fellow and Military Expert at the Berlin office of the European Council on Foreign Relations. And joining us online is my Ukrainian colleague, Roman Goncharenko, who is working for DW's Russian desk in Bonn. And let me start by asking you, Gustav, as our defense expert, to tell us what you think is happening right now. If you look at the front lines, it appears that both sides essentially are stalled, but that's not the end of the story, is it?
Well, not the end, but it's most of it. So the Russian offensives and offensive actions have slowed down. They haven't stopped now. Which is part of the problem, but they have considerably slowed down. They have narrowed down. The Russians have difficulty sustaining their fires, their artillery war, but nevertheless, they're still on the offensive. On the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainians try to disperse Russian forces as much as they can, try to force them to split, to maneuver in order to weaken their strong points. However, Ukraine, on the other hand, is not yet strong enough to mount larger counteroffensives, counteroffensives as compared to tactical ones. Ukraine can capitalize on Russian mistakes if they happen, but they cannot yet force the Russian army to withdraw from an operative direction on their own. For this, they would need more supply of heavy weapons, particularly tanks and infantry fighting vehicles from the West, which unfortunately is not yet coming.
And we want to come back to that a little bit later. Let me go now to my colleague, Roman. And Roman, one Pentagon official said in recent days that they're estimating Russian casualties so far over the last 6 months at 70 to 80,000. Ukraine has also been sustaining heavy losses. So what does that mean for both sides in terms of their ability to keep on waging this war?
Well, both sides, as you've rightly put, have heavy casualties, but Russia has much greater resources in human power, in tanks and airplanes, anything you take it. So military hardware. And those figures that you've just mentioned, they of course include those that Russia recruited in the occupied territories in the east and in the south Ukraine, especially in the east, in the Donbas region. So they're actually Ukrainians who are also fighting on the Russian side. Most of them probably do it because they want to, but some are forced. We also have reports of that. And it is not clear for how long the war can continue as before. We have now reached a point where we are watching this war for 6 months already, which is a very huge war. You have to remember the front line is more than 1,000 kilometers long. It is very, very long. So, and we have to differentiate the situation because in the east, in Donbas, Russia's offensive is very slow, but is continuing, as Gustav rightly said. In the south, there is kind of a stalemate. And in the north, the situation is very rapidly developing again, I think. Around the city of Kharkiv, which is the second largest city of Ukraine, we have every day heavy rocket new rockets striking that city, and I think there could be a new attempt by Russia to intensify the fighting there, which would be very bad for Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And we're going to take a closer look at some of the regions that you just mentioned in a moment. But let me first ask Jessica, when you look at where this conflict stands now, nearly 6 months after it began, what worries you the most?
That's a huge question. Well, next to the thousands of dead and wounded and millions of Ukrainians displaced, my greatest concern right now is, in fact, the political stagnation we're seeing in Western Europe and in the United States. It seems that the NATO partners have decided to support Ukraine with heavy weapons, but only to the point to keep them afloat and not to actually pull them fully out of the water. And we need to see more engagement of our political leaders across NATO with our voters to explain to the people why it matters to invest now in Ukraine's success. And we need also for our political leaders to recognize that we cannot afford to stagnate. That stagnation on the battlefield is a result of political stagnation. And if they want to see progress on the battlefield, that means that the political establishments will need to proactively build support for Ukraine and deliver more heavy weapons now.
Let us take a closer look now at what's happening behind that long front line that Roman mentioned a moment ago. Early in the war, Russian troops occupied the Kherson region in the southern part of Ukraine. Now the Ukrainian army is said to be preparing a major counteroffensive. With successes still modest, hopes of many are riding high on firepower provided by the United States.
Precision strike missiles fired in quick succession. The US-supplied HIMARS missile launchers give the Ukrainian army an advantage. At 80 kilometers, they reach farther than the average Russian artillery and can thus hit army depots at a distance. Depots have to be moved further away from the front, slowing down supplies for Russian troops. Can Ukraine's counter-offensive to retake the Kherson region in the south of the country succeed? These attacks slow down shelling from the Russian side for a period of time. But the Russians are adapting, learning the lessons that our HIMARS and long-range weapons are teaching them. Unfortunately, the course of the war is not yet turning in our favor in a sustainable way. It's a process. Everything is constantly changing. There continues to be a shortage of Western weapons, according to soldiers in the trenches. The Southern Front, more a patience game than counter-offensive?
And let me put that question straight away to Roman. And Roman, in fact, Ukraine has damaged or destroyed most of the bridges that link Kherson to the other Russian-held territories. Ukrainian generals have told Western media that they think Kherson could be liberated by the end of this year. Would you say that's right or overly optimistic?
I think it's too optimistic at this point because we don't know what will happen in the coming months if the West will supply more weapons, more heavier weapons for the Ukrainian army. And this is crucial if the counteroffensive will succeed and when will it succeed. So Ukraine has a chance to liberate Kherson, I'm sure, but I think it will be a longer run, not just by the end of this year. I think it's rather something we could talk about early next year, because it is very difficult to liberate such a big city than to hold it. And Russians could take it at the beginning of this war, and they didn't have much resistance. This is a big question how this could happen, and this is something that Ukrainians are still asking themselves: how could Russia occupy such a huge territory just in a few days? This didn't happen in the east, where Ukraine has very strong positions. This didn't happen also in the north, so Russia failed around the capital Kiev. But in the south, in the cities like Kherson and later in Mariupol as well, Russia could advance very fast. And I think Ukrainians will not be able to take them back as quickly as Russia occupied them.
Gustav, this U.S.-supplied HIMARS missile system that was mentioned in our report, could it be a game changer not only for Kherson, for that region, but also for the war overall?
There is no single weapon system that is a game changer. A combined arms maneuver force needs a broad set of capabilities to succeed, not just one set of weapons. The second thing is the HIMARS is used in a very selective, narrow role that is providing deep strike. The HIMARS is the replacement, so to say, for an air force to strike targets in the enemy's rear, take them out. But the HIMARS, for example, is not used in a traditional rocket artillery role, for example, to stall Russian advances, because there are too few launches, too few missiles. Those missiles that there are precision-guided, GPS-guided munitions. They strike point targets. They're not like, for example, cheap cluster ammunition that just litters out and blasts away an entire area that the enemy is using for its attack. This is why it's only a very narrow role to use them for. For defending the Donbass, actually, the cheap cluster stuff that we kind of get disused to produce and disused to use would be much more useful for the Ukrainians because you can use it directly in the front against the troops. The Kherson thing as well, it's flat terrain, open terrain. You need tanks to provide direct fire support, and you need infantry fighting vehicles or armored personnel carriers, whatever kind of armored transportation to bring infantry from village A to village B. Otherwise, they would just be slaughtered, like in the First World War, by whatever machine gun running across the field. So
if I can just jump in, does Ukraine currently have both the tanks and the material, as well as the military capacity, the forces that it would need to launch a major counteroffensive in Kherson?
They have enough soldiers, but they don't have enough heavy weapons. Ukraine's army has grown a lot. General mobilization, a lot of volunteers. There are, in terms of men and women to fight, already much stronger than the Russians. The Russians have more artillery, more ammunition, more tanks, more infantry fighting vehicles. This is why they can substitute lacking soldiers with superior firepower. As long as this balance doesn't change, Ukraine has problems getting this superiority in man to turn it into results on the battlefield, and that will unfortunately continue.
Jessica, let me come back to the point you made earlier about concerns regarding the possibility that Western support will flag. In fact, many of Ukraine's Western allies, including most especially Germany, are going to be facing a tough winter with soaring heat bills due to the effects of the conflict on energy markets. Do you think that President Zelenskyy, Ukrainian leaders, under these circumstances, can afford to play the long game, or do they need to deliver quicker results in order to sustain Western support?
It's a chicken and egg problem, because in order to deliver quick results, they need more heavy weapons. And that's the message coming from Kyiv to Berlin to Washington. Unfortunately, it has yet to achieve the desired result. We're still waiting to see the Americans deliver artillery at the level they can. We're still waiting for Germany to deliver armored vehicles at the level they can and indeed have already committed. And at the end of the day, we need to make clear to the public before this winter sets in that it's in everyone's interest for Ukraine to win this war quickly, beyond the obvious moral imperative and humanitarian imperative to end the war, to end the bloodshed. Also, it will be cheaper for everyone, both in terms of military assistance as well as in terms of reconstruction costs if the war ends sooner. So Western governments need to recognize that investing now, stepping up now to send heavy weapons, this will lower the bill and lower the political as well as financial cost for everyone down the road.
Roman, Putin is planning a fake referendum in the Kherson region to legitimate Russian control there. Is that also a reason that President Zelenskyy actually needs to act quickly there to try to disrupt that?
Well, yes, of course. Ukraine is trying to disrupt that, and Putin and his army or his government are planning several so-called referendum. Not just in Kherson, but also in the region Zaporizhzhia, in the neighboring region, which is very interesting, I think, because Russia does not control the whole region, Zaporizhzhia. It doesn't control the capital, the city of Zaporizhzhia itself, which is a very important industrial city in Ukraine, not just because of the nuclear power plant nearby, but in general, it is very important for Ukraine. But it is still under Ukrainian control, and we haven't seen substantial Russian advances around that city. And they could easily conduct such a referendum, probably in the in the region of Luhansk, which they control nearly completely, or in Donetsk, where they've been for 8 years. But they don't do that, or they are maybe slower there. I think they are trying to move faster in the east, because they want to somehow legitimize their control of that nuclear power plant in Energodar in Zaporizhzhia region, because it's very important, it's very big.
And we're going to go a little bit later to Zaporizhzhia, but let us move on now to the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula, annexed by Russia in 2014. President Zelenskyy demands that it should be restored to Ukraine, a goal that appeared almost illusory until mysterious explosions at Russian bases in Crimea. The most recent hit was an ammunition depot. According to Moscow, this was an act of sabotage. Kiev speaks of a masterstroke by Ukrainian armed forces. Earlier, there had been heavy detonations at the Saki air base. Russian accounts implied an accident. However, satellite images show several destroyed Russian fighter jets. So again, let me go straight to our military expert, Gustav. What is happening here, and what do you think the impact of these strikes deep in Crimea is likely to be?
Well, it's of course hard to establish a clear picture of what has happened and tell it with certainty. But the attack on Saki Air Base, which was quite a remarkable thing, we saw on the satellite pictures, you saw these big craters. So that means an underground explosion. You also saw the explosion at Saki Air Base, that very dark cloud, a lot of dirt in the flames that concurs with the picture of an underground explosions. Now, saboteurs would need to gain access to each and every one of the bunkers, and at least 3 of them were detonated, to detonate charges inside at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which is very unlikely, and no shots fired on the base. So the guess there is that it's a Ukrainian-developed ballistic missile that, of course, has the speed and the penetration capabilities to run its warhead into the bunker and then detonate there, which would lead to exact these kind of explosions. The newer one, so the ammunition depot in the vicinity of Jankoy that detonated, this one might have been the work of special forces or saboteurs, because the ammunition there was stored basically littering around on the train station. And of course, if the ammunition is stored overground, you just have to hit it with something that ignites it, and boom, there you go.
So what's the significance of that, in a word?
In a word, is that, of course, the Ukrainians have a much better deep strike capability than the Russians have thought they had. And you see that also by Russia increasing their security, both air defense, but also guards and sort of physical security around facilities in their rear. And that, of course, forces a further dispersion of assets and forces. All these infantry, you need to guard bridges, railway stations, etc. You can't send them into Bakhmut or other hotspots where you would need them.
Jessica, the role of American intelligence has come under increasing scrutiny, with Russia accusing the White House of supplying targeting information to Kiev for its long-range strikes. Do you think that's the case, and is that risky? And could we even be seeing some undisclosed secret U.S. weapons at work here?
I wouldn't worry too much about that. The American secret services and military have been supporting Ukraine from the beginning of the war. American intelligence warned Ukraine about the pending invasion even before it all began. So for the Kremlin to react and be upset that American intelligence is supporting Ukrainian intelligence, it's a non-starter. We already know this. It's not a secret. I think it's actually an encouraging sign to show that the Ukrainian military is able to act on the intelligence that they themselves, as well as that their allies, gather. They're showing operational capacity and success. And this is really what's worrying the Russians, not the fact that the Ukrainians are perhaps getting satellite imagery from the Americans.
Roman, how worried should the Russians be about Ukrainian guerrilla fighters, essentially called partisans? We heard Gustav talking about the role of saboteurs, possibly in these explosions in Crimea. Who's organizing the partisans, and what's the goal here? Because clearly the numbers are not sufficient to actually oust the occupiers.
Well, we do not have enough information, which is, of course, very secretive and very special information, very sensitive information for the Ukrainian government. That is why Kiev is majorly silent to that. What we've seen so far were some minor attacks in Russian-occupied cities, which were newly occupied since the start of that big war in February. In smaller towns, we've seen that. We now could assume that there might be partisans involved in the Crimea, and we do not still have confirmation to that. It is possible, but I wouldn't overestimate it. If at all, in the Crimea, I would say it's on a smaller scale, because that peninsula have been under Russian control for 8 years, and Russians, of course, used that time to search for Ukrainian partisans and to take them out, either arrest them or kill them. So I would expect that we could see more of a partisan movement in the occupied regions, in the east and in the south of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Finally, let us take a trip to one more danger zone that has been raising concern. The situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine could create risk far beyond the region. Occupied by Russian soldiers since March, it is once again being shelled, and this is a dangerous pawn in this drawn-out conflict.
A projectile hit close to Zaporizhzhia's 6 reactors. Moscow claims the Ukrainian army is shelling Europe's largest nuclear facility with drones, heavy artillery and rocket launchers. Kyiv claims Russian troops are targeting the security infrastructure of the power plant they occupy, misusing it for attacks and terror on the surrounding area. Any radiation leakage in Zaporizhzhia could affect countries of the European Union, Turkey, Georgia, and countries further afield. Everything depends on the direction and strength of the wind. According to experts, the wind in the region blows mainly to the south and east. Thus, in a worst-case scenario, it would also affect Russia. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency said they were playing with fire, warned of the danger of a nuclear catastrophe, and is demanding inspectors are given access. How dangerous is the situation in Zaporizhzhia?
And let me put that question straight away to Roman. How dangerous is it?
It is dangerous, but I wouldn't say it is extremely dangerous, because I think Russians are not insane. They know if anything serious happens, then they will be also suffering, because Crimea, Russian-occupied Crimea, is not far away, and Russia is not far away. So I think they are pursuing here 2 goals. One is to put pressure on the West, because the West is very much afraid of a nuclear catastrophe in Ukraine. And second is to cut Ukraine off from that plant, which is very important for the Ukrainian energy supply and for Ukraine earning money, because Ukraine is selling its energy to the West. If that nuclear plant is under Russian control, or if the Russians run it down, which is possible, then Ukraine will lose a lot of money, and it will have to reorganize its own power grid.
Gustav, both sides are disputing who's actually behind the recent shelling of Zaporizhzhia. Russia has hundreds of forces around this nuclear power plant. Why would they endanger their own men?
Well, Russia uses the power plant first and foremost as an ammunition depot because they know that the Ukrainians don't strike it at full speed because of the danger of leakages, etc. That's why it is an ammunition depot. However, that said, actually the kind of fighting and shelling is not the greatest concern I have on that. The reactors are fairly well protected by thick concrete. You would really need special ammunition to penetrate that. A kind of of-course artillery shell will not cause them to detonate or to cause a new Chernobyl. What could be the case is that, and what is the real danger, is that Russian occupying forces inhibit the normal technicians in the reactor to make their duties and sort of have their regularly safety procedures. Russian soldiers might be drunk. Russian commanders might lose the discipline of their troops. And whatever they're going to do, that's the real danger. That's more dangerous than artillery.
Thank you. Going to cut you off there to ask our title question one more time, Jessica. Can either side break the stalemate?
Ukraine can, if they get more heavy weapons now.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us today. Thank you also to Von, to Roman for joining us online. And to all of you out there, thanks for being with us.